we have titled this particular webinar or this workshop as Looking Back and Looking Forward. And primarily because I suppose for all of us, and I'm certain that every member of the panel would endorse it, this has been in some manner our feel-good moments. We had tough times, but we came out victorious. So it's like every time you're feeling down, you remember these CRPD negotiations. You remember what happened in the IDC. You remember anecdotes of various kinds. You remember smart things people did, which were just out of the book. And it's basically because it has been such a personal space for getting inspiration, we thought it would be good to go back to that space, as we all of us in different parts of the world have been trying to realize the CRPD, in fact, on ground in our respective countries, to see what learning one can have from that experience. And as such, also to get together again and exchange views on how we should go forward. So I am starting these proceedings with a fair amount of nostalgia. All the members who are on this panel were in the ad hoc committee in very, very different capacities. And yet we all came to know each other. We kind of also, some points, collaborated. Some of us were in fact part of the same delegation. So all that taking into account, I've my first question to the panel is this, that you were in the ad hoc committee with different, affiliations, be it DPOs or human rights institutions or with your government. Now, how did this affiliation influence your participation in the deliberation? Did these affiliations limit you in any manner? Or where and how did they intersect? I've got 3 questions here. I'm asking all 3 together so that each panelist has some time to reflect and talk about. I also wanted to know if these intersections helped in the negotiations. And lastly, how do you advance the agenda of law reform at national level? If you've done work on national level, did you adapt any of the ad hoc committee strategies to sort of lower resistance in your own country level? So if we could, I thought that because this is supposed to be like international law and international negotiations give a lot of preference to the state parties. So even though this is a civil society event, the only member in the panel we have who was a member of the state delegation, I thought I'll have her start the proceedings. So Chris, can we have you come in first?
Yes, good morning. I'm in the United States right now, so it's good morning here, and kia ora tātou katoa from New Zealand, which is the delegation that I was a part of. So I had 2 hats. I was a part of the New Zealand delegation to the ad hoc committee, and I want to just point out, and I know there's people, I've invited a few people, so I know there's some people who don't have a lot of knowledge of this process, that this was the first human rights treaty in history that had involved civil society. And by civil society, we mean members of the community and the particular demographic that was affected, which was persons with disabilities. So this was groundbreaking and record-breaking. And New Zealand itself had quite a key role with the instigation and the genesis of the convention, and really in some respects had a bit of a leadership role. And secondly, around the time that I came on, just after I came on, the chair of the negotiations transitioned to being a New Zealander. So that gave me quite a unique position. Now, also, I was on the board of the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry at the time, and I do just have to augment Bhargavi's introduction to Tina. Tina was the chair at that time and really led so much of the process for users and survivors of psychiatry, and also within the disability community. So I think without Tina, we wouldn't have made anywhere near some of the gains and the groundbreaking changes and decisions that we did. So because I had two hats, I was in this really unique position. I had a unique ear to the World Network concerns and the Disability Alliance concerns, and I was able to pass that on to both the government delegation, and I had the ear of the chair of the process, and so that gave me a really unique position. I wasn't supposed to advocate for things like the abolition of force and coercion because of my role as a government delegate, but I found ways to do that, and I actually found that there were that there were some sort of powerful sweet spots in terms of being able to have the ears of both parties. At times it was crazy making, you know, having two hats, I have to say, because there were very strong expectations from both parties about what we wanted to see happen and about the restrictions of the government and the bounds of the law. But it actually was quite a unique position, and at times I think I was able to use that as a bit of a pivot in the opportunities that I had.
I don't know what happened. Hello?
We can hear you.
I can't hear you, and you've just vanished from my screen also. I don't know what happened.
Oh. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you anymore.
Good. Oh, I can see myself. Okay. But I did stop talking.
I don't know.
I can see Chris also, and I think she says she stopped talking, so I think it's up to Amita to go to the next person.
You may be on speak. No, yes, you may be on speaker view. So it's I vanish when I stop talking. If you're on speaker view.
Okay, I don't know. I can neither see myself nor see. Should I just sign in again? That may work out better. Or...
Just pass the floor to the next one, Amita, and I think then.
All right, fine, Stefan. Then you just come in, because I thought that, you know, like you were representing civil society and organizations across. So what was your experience like? Yes,
thank you, Amita, and thank you to inviting me for this this event. It definitely brings amazing memories. No? So I'm very honored that you thought about me. I represented throughout the process from the very beginning, which was also an honor and pleasure, the European Disability Forum, which is the organization that brings together at European level all relevant representative disability groups, both organized at European level, but also at national level. For me, I had quite some experience of doing advocacy work at European level, but because of the particularities of the European Union, there were certain topics which were not on the agenda at European level. Basically, at European level, you focus on those issues that are competence of the European Union. And the most groundbreaking elements of the convention, Article 12 on legal capacity, the whole issue about deprivation of liberty, independent living, all those issues were not an issue at European level. So we didn't have, as an organization, we didn't have a narrative, and I would say even a knowledge on these issues. No? And that was the first thing we had to do. We had to go to this process, and we had to learn about it. Tina was the professor. I mean, Amita, you also, but definitely we all learned from you. And I think that was the first issue, to really understand the issues, because they were, at least for me, they were new. And even beyond that, I would say there were also, while there were issues which in theory should have been part of the competence and work of disability organizations at national level, it was very rarely the case that national disability organizations would focus on issues like legal capacity. Even organizations representing persons with intellectual disabilities, they were working on other issues. But this whole groundbreaking, this paradigm shift, as we often describe the CRPD, all these issues were not on the agenda of the majority of the disability organizations, including that representing groups that were directly affected by those issues. No? And I think that was the exciting thing. And what I remember also, and with a lot, is this: at a certain moment, when we had gradually learned, thanks to you, Amita, and particularly to Tina, we had learned what the issues were about, and we had, as much as possible, embraced them. I think what was exciting is when I remember Kiki Nosho, our friend from when she came out at one of the meetings, basically saying, these are not Tina's issues. These are not the World Network issues. These are our issues. And that made a difference, because at a certain moment, I remember the New Zealand delegation coming to us saying, well, but you know, is this really serious? What are you really behind what these people are saying? We said, yeah, of course, we are fully behind them. No? And I think that was an amazing experience. Now it became, and I think that is going to one of the other questions, which I won't be able to answer in full, because I've not been doing work at national level. But to some extent, that is also partly the trick that we need to achieve at national level. These issues cannot be the issues of the psychosocial disability movement. These need to be the issues of the broader disability movement. And I know that is sometimes easier, sometimes it doesn't happen in the same way. But I think for me that was the key of the success. Now that these issues became the issues of the whole IDC, the whole disability caucus, and not just the issues of a few illuminated people that became an issue of everybody. And I really want to highlight the amazing job that Tina did in terms of making us understand these sometimes very complex issues, with which we're still struggling, and normally so. But anyway, over to you. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Okay. Thank you, Stefan. Tina, I mean, as the person who was heading the WNSP's delegation, as well as, I would say, possibly the largest civil society delegation, which was put together primarily by the effort of, I know for a fact that I was invited to the ad hoc committee because of the kind of initiative shown by the World Network to be looking at every kind of resource to make for as representative a delegation as possible. There was also this whole business of cross-disability advocacy that Stefan was just talking about. And I do think that it wouldn't be incorrect to say that the strategy of saying that, okay, the World Network's issues will not remain only the World Network's issues, were driven by you in a very major kind of a way. So could you sort of like just come in and elaborate what it was all like for you? Because there was a lot of pressure there, and to handle both a large delegation as well as the cross-disability advocacy, the evening meetings of the IDC, all of that. And some level of, at least some, because I'll come back to Chris, but if you have been doing a fair amount of advocacy in the US too, what it's been like subsequently, how much of your learning from the ad hoc committee days has informed your work?
Okay, thank you. I mean, there's actually really a whole lot to address there, and I'll try to get to all of it. So for me, I actually have to start back before you, Amita, and Chris, and some others came in. so I did come in through a DPO, through the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. I came in as a survivor of psychiatric violence myself, who had been part of the movement, and we would call it Against Psychiatric Oppression, various names, for over 20 years by that time. Now it's over 40 years. And so I actually, I mean, it's there's just always so much to say and so many different ways to say it. But I had also been, during my time in law school, shortly before the ad hoc committee, I had been starting to think about how to apply disability non-discrimination principles to international human rights to address the issues of psychiatric oppression. And then the opportunity to be involved with the drafting of this new convention, which came to me through the World Network. I was not the chair when I started out. I was a member, but I had ideas of what could be done. And so I was given the opportunity, my ideas persuaded Carl Bach Jensen, who was at that time the treasurer, later a co-chair. And and he was able to persuade the rest of the World Network board to let me take this up. I mean, the first step was participating in a meeting in Mexico City in advance of the first ad hoc committee meeting. What I want to highlight about that, Gerard was part of that also. He was one of the authors of the NGO paper that came out of it. And from the very beginning, you can see the respect for DPO leadership, because it was that paper drawn up by the NGOs that formed the basis for the topics of discussion in the first two sessions of the ad hoc committee, before anybody really knew where this was going. And I think it also similarly formed the basis for the chair's draft, the various drafts that came into the working group, and then the working group, the participation in the working group, for me, as representative of World Network, was crucial. Those early stages were crucial to when we proposed text, when our proposals of text came into the early drafts that went into the working group. And then in the working group, Stefan was part of that also, as well as Gerard. We participated on an equal basis as states. And there were some other DPOs that did not feel they had an adequate chance to get their concerns put into the text in the working group. World Federation of the Deaf felt very unsatisfied at that point. But for us, it was crucial. And even on legal capacity, I know there's been some disagreement about, the working group text and what happened after that. The working group text was a compromise, just as the eventual Article 12 was a compromise. It was ambiguous. Yes, we did make improvements in the ultimate draft of Article 12, but it was the first process in the working group. I remember discussing in the informals of the working group, that on Article 12, it was led by the ambassador from Sierra Leone, who was a lawyer. And I remember the kind of puzzlement on his face, hearing that, we wanted all people with disabilities to have full legal capacity, and just, and yes, you can provide support, but we're insisting that you don't ever take away from a person the right to decide about their own life. And that was, the paradigm shift started there. So I do want to say, I did play a role. It was important to me to be fully integrated within the process of the entire disability community. And I was one of the people, along with Stefan, who was even calling for the creation of the Disability Caucus. And Stefan, you may remember at one point it was you and me and Maria Veronica Reina who took a somewhat informal role of trying to pull the caucus together. To actually keep it going in a day-to-day way. And that was crucial for the reasons Stefan said. In terms of the national level, I haven't had the same kind of opportunity at the national level to put these issues into a public debate. I have continued to work at the global level because the work was not done when the convention was adopted, certainly, until we got the general comment on Article 12 and the guidelines on Article 14. I felt that my role had to focus at that international level so that everybody was clear on what these provisions that were so important actually meant, and there could be no further debate about it, at least within the framework of the CRPD and its jurisprudence. Other things, the special rapporteur on torture, there were various ways that the norms kept getting developed, and that process is still happening. I have been involved with and also following a lot of work at the national level, groundbreaking legal capacity reform in Peru, which is the highest in the world. I think it's very elegantly done and complies with Article 12, with the exception of a few details that are not conceptually necessarily important. And right now in the United States, there's a very interesting intersectional process going on from the movement for Black Lives, which is calling for defunding of the police and the abolition of police and prisons, the replacement of those systems by community safety and justice. It's a visionary movement in the same way that our movement is visionary. And there is a linkage with the disability movement. Some very good work has come in about including abolition of forced psychiatry and the provision of crisis support in a community way as part of that decarceration and abolition of all of these harmful systems. I'm kind of in the margins in relation to that movement, but I'm following it very closely and trying to participate in whatever small ways I can.
Thank you, Tina. I think that was somewhere also the strategy that you started out with in the ad hoc committee, wherein it was to get as interested in other people's things as to get them interested in yours. Daniel, you were a member of the WNSP in the ad hoc committee. And I remember, participated, especially in the right to work interventions that you did come in. What was your experience like? Because and you were at very many times, representing the WNSP in the IDC deliberations in the evening, where it was important that one member or the other should be attending, and very often you were there. So I just wanted to know what was your whole experience like of being part, and how much of that experience and knowledge have you taken back and sort of maybe used in Uganda, subsequently, that sort of things. Hi, Daniel.
Daniel, you might need to unmute, or somebody might need to request that Daniel ask to unmute.
Okay.
Here he
Hi.
is.
Did you hear me?
Hello.
Hi, hi.
Yes, I am hearing you. Are you hearing me?
I can hear you, but I can't still see
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can.
Hello.
I can hear you.
Pardon?
I can hear you,
Now, can you
Daniel.
hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you, Daniel. I can hear you.
Yes, can you hear?
Yes, I can.
Yes,
I can.
I said, yes, now, thank you very much. And I'm glad to re-meet after a long period of time. Of course, I was part of the International Disability Caucus. And the experiences, it was a learning experience. And I learned a lot, networking with others, and more especially learning more from other self-advocates, especially Tina, who has just finished. He was a great asset. You remember you used to work together, Professor Amit and Tina, because of the legal background. So I learned a lot from there. And I also participated in the right to work because in Uganda, we had legal frameworks which were using the word unsound mind, or like in public service, they used to ask, have you ever suffered was really used to discriminate against persons with psychosocial disability. So that's why I was very passionate about the right to work. And yes, whatever I learned, and I put it back. We try to make sure that our government signs and ratifies the convention. And later, after the initial report, and we also gave an alternative report in Geneva, and concluding remarks were made. They were still not domesticating the laws. So what I did was to have a public litigation
Okay.
and in the Constitutional Court. This public litigation was very important because later the public litigation led to them coming up with a mental health bill, which scraped off all the other words which were in the Treatment Act of 1964, which were labeling people like imbecile, criminal, lunatic, and idiots, which was killing us legally. And of course, we are still fighting because other laws like the Local Government Act and other, still have such words that one can lose. We are still fighting that eradicate throughout the Constitution, but we are heading on. And it also helped me that I contributed a lot in the Disability Act in Uganda, which was modified to, to be on international standards with the CRPD. And so in the case the Mental Health Act is still not very human rights based, we can still use the Disability Rights Act. So that experience was quite very good. And today, because of that public litigation, even Makerere University is using it to teach the students of law that things have changed. The paradigm shift Tina has talked about and has, there is a change, and they are trying to bring it up, and people are making research about legal capacity and the capacity to act, which is quite very good. I was once called also to comment on somebody doing a PhD about legal capacity. Is it a reality in Africa and in Uganda? So I feel that capacity I got when I used to come to New York and negotiate the CRPD was very important, and it has brought results in Uganda. I think maybe that is all I can say as of now. maybe if there are any other questions.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So I started out by asking Chris to answer because I said, okay, you were a member of state delegation. I want to move on now to Gerard Quinn because I did not really know him too much in the ad hoc committee. But he was like, you know, one of those people I would keep seeing coming in and out of rooms, doing a lot of shadow work, doing a lot of backroom work. So I'm kind of very fascinated and want to use this opportunity, Gerard, to find out what your ad hoc committee experience was like. What were you doing, you know, like where you were sitting and kind of getting the ear of so many people, moving from state delegation to NGO delegations to back to your human rights institutions. I just wanted to say that, you know, like, though I didn't know you too well, I suppose I did see a lot of you at that point, and I'm very curious to know what you were doing.
So, hi Anita, hi everybody.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm slightly late. Yeah, it's like a whole series of accidents, actually, when you look back on it. The first accident for me was when I was fresh out of law school. I went to Council of Europe in Strasbourg as an intern, or stagiaire as we call them, interested in criminal justice. And my head of unit said, welcome for 6 months. I'll show you nothing. Nothing in my filing cabinets is open to you whatsoever. So I was feeling very aggrieved about this. And I met the guy in the next office who happened to be working on a recommendation for the Committee of Ministers on basically what we would call civil commitment. It was very, very, very basic stuff, and it was 2 or 3 generations behind what the CRPD is, but it was my first exposure really to disability issues until later in the 80s when our first daughter with a disability was born. So it was like everything I'd learned up to that point then became turned around and focused like a laser beam on the issue of disability. I remember it very, very, very distinctly. And I got involved with the Government Commission in Ireland drafting a book on comparative disability discrimination law. And I was using the good offices of my friend and mentor, Philip Alston, to feed me a lot of information and stuff. And by accident, he became the chair of the UN Committee on Economic and Social Rights. And one of their first general comments was on people with disabilities. And his intern at the time was Teresa Degener, who wrote most of that general comment, but we collaborated in it. And so the common denominator between Teresa and myself has always been Philip Alston, which is quite amazing. And Teresa was the one who first told me that there were moves in the 1980s, 1987 to be exact, to begin drafting a treaty on the rights of people with disabilities. And in unpacking my many, many boxes of dusty material, I've rediscovered the Italian draft, which is actually excellent, and the Swedish draft, which is much shorter. Make a very long story short, they failed to make any headway. And then again, by accident, I was on a Ministry of Foreign Affairs Joint Committee on Human Rights in the late 1990s. It was the time when our former president, Mary Robinson, became UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And there was, I'm sure Tina and Stefan remember this, a biannual resolution on human rights that went to the UN Human Rights Council, as boring as hell. It was like 3 pages of saying absolutely nothing. You had to keep your eyes like that to actually read this stuff. So the ministry asked me and a few others, what should they do to make this meaningful? So we said they should put something in about getting serious about drafting a treaty on the rights of people with disabilities. They did. They put that language in the resolution, but they were torpedoed by 2 of their EU partners. I don't mind naming them now. It's 20 or 30 years on. Netherlands was one and Sweden was the other. And the reason why is they were saying, it's too early yet. Give the system time to work itself pure. Exactly the same arguments that's been said today about a treaty on the rights of older people, another day's story. So they decided they wouldn't let go of the issue. They would prepare the evidence as to why the system wasn't working, and they would make recommendations to improve the existing treaty-based system so that it would stretch to encompass disability. So lo and behold, Teresa Degener and I were commissioned to produce that report. We were not commissioned to put a chapter in arguing for a treaty on the rights of people with disabilities. And that's the reason why you see our names on the front cover. The Office of the High Commission wanted to give itself plausible deniability by blaming Degener and Quinn if the chapter proved to be too controversial. Well, actually, within 3 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks, what we were saying was orthodoxy. Everybody was saying the time is now. And of course, Mexico famously came forward with the resolution before the General Assembly. So I played 3 very different roles during the drafting. You could say I saw it from all sides. I was on the state delegation to begin with. That was fascinating, not so much because of the state. Most states, and I'm sure Tina and Stefan will remember this, had no instructions during the first ad hoc committee. They were completely at sea. What was really interesting, though, was to be part of the informal meetings of EU delegations before each drafting session. That was absolutely fascinating, I must say. I was removed from the state delegation because we had a very conservative Attorney General, and I was known as someone who was in favor of economic, social, and cultural rights, and he was utterly ideologically opposed. So I was unceremoniously removed from the state delegation, but only for that reason. I got an invitation then to come along to the working group and to lead the delegation of Rehabilitation International. If you might remember, Lex Friedan was the president of RI at that stage. Really, really interesting guy from many different perspectives, highly engaged on the topic of independent living. And I was fortunate enough to bring along with me people like Rosemary Caius, who's now, of course, on the CRPD committee, and 2 or 3 others. And after that, I was all the time a member of our Human Rights Commission, but the penny never dropped that Human Rights Commissions could have or should have a positive or affirmative role in drafting the convention. And the International Coordinating Committee, as it was called at the time, of Human Rights Commissions had a representative. It was Charlotte McLean for a period. Then it was Anuradha Mohed from India, from the Indian Commission for a period. And then in the latter stages, I think the last 2 ad hoc committee sessions, I was the representative of NHRIs. I can't remember. Anuradha had to bow out. There was some reason she had to, in terms of her own work in India and so forth. So I saw it from the 3 different lenses. I must say I changed personality 2 or 3 times because I went into this process as an orthodox equal opportunities lawyer, but was very quickly disabused that worldview really isn't comprehensive enough, deep enough to actually reach the sinews of the issues that are important. And I mean, the first huge personality change for me has been the whole personhood side of the convention and how utterly foundational that has been. There's some other changes as well, but that was the most meaningful one. I'll tell you a very funny story, and I'll stop there. I was at one of the middle ad hoc committee sessions, and was pretty bored at what was happening. So I went out for a coffee. Unfortunately, it was the coffee shop where everybody smoked, which was a terrible experience. And then I came back in, and unbeknownst to me, the chair had appointed me to head up a working group on reasonable accommodation. And it was one of the most fascinating experiences I ever had, because a number of delegations simply interpreted it as a roundabout way of rendering economic and social rights judicially enforceable. I kid you not. So I had some fascinating discussions on that. But let me shut up there and go back to you, Imogen.
Thank you, Gerard. Well, I did not even know of your other avatars in the ad hoc committee. I only knew you in the human rights institutions part of the, maybe that's where you were when I joined the deliberations. Anyway, see, what has come through is one for all of the panelists have brought home, that it was like each one was in some manner compelled to reinvent themselves, compelled also to kind of, invent their own rules. Okay, you are in a space which has been not occupied before. You're asking for something which people are not even sure they're ready to give. And you kind of created your own pathways, created your own strategies, did a whole range of things of having conversations around. Somebody in the chat was asking, what about the role of the DPOs from the South in implementation? It's something we'll take more on at the end of the panel, possibly in asking, from here what? I mean, I'm asking this question throughout, but we'll be asking that in a more focused kind of manner. If you notice also, one of the things which has come in every intervention was how legal capacity was possibly the naughtiest or the most difficult provision, wherein in the negotiation process, and it was at so many points of time that it almost looked like we totally lost it. To stay in the game, what all happened, but also the fact of that even now, if there is one article of the convention which is still being resisted in the manner in which national legislations are being formulated, or what is happening in the reports to the ad hoc committee. So I was just wondering, with this panel, which was at it, in the heart of it all, and I know that when we got the footnote and all the struggle which happened subsequently to get the footnote dropped, it was like unceasing kind of effort. And now you find that all the prejudice you thought you had, somewhere wiped out, or at least sidelined, keeps coming back. So what do you think has been our gain in getting that Article 12? I'm going to begin with you, Tina. I know it's because close to heart issue, but I think you might kind of spell it out clearly as to what you think is the big kind of gain, because very often people feel, you can have things in law, but doesn't really make a difference on the ground. And then I would have other panelists chip in. The other questions I have are more particular to specific panelists. Yes, Tina.
Thank you. I have a kind of double way of looking at this, because, first, I think when we see Article 12 as the heart of the convention, we also have to bring Articles 14 and 15 along in there. And I have always argued that in essence, that Article 12, the right to legal capacity, in effect encompasses the right to be free from any kind of forced psychiatric intervention, as including the right to be free from detention in a psychiatric setting. And in fact, those premises are included in the jurisprudence of the CRPD committee now through the guidelines on Article 14. I think it's very important. And this is the reason why. Article 12 was able to become a center of focus, in my view, in part because it was something that touched on all people with disabilities in one way or another. It was not only people who are users of mental health services or survivors of psychiatric violence or people with psychosocial disabilities. It also included people with intellectual disabilities. And to be honest, their organizations, which are led by family members, self-advocates play an important role, but the organizations are led by family members. They have power and they have relations to governments that we did not have. So it was a really critical alliance of these two constituencies that are the most impacted, plus deaf people and blind people are impacted. There are still legal capacity legislations that exclude deaf people, for instance. And we were able to make legal capacity into an issue that really clarified a whole set of rights, a whole set of principles about what I see it as, that equality encompasses autonomy and solidarity. And that's really the core of what the Disability Convention means, what it brings to the human rights framework, and what has always been part of the disability rights framework with independent living and all that kind of thing. And I mean, I do see legal capacity and all of these issues together, the liberty and freedom from torture and all of that. Every time we had setbacks in relation to Articles 14 and 15 as well in the convention. Sometimes we had to actually overcome them later on, such as with the torture rapporteur. Since we didn't get that into Article 15 per se, we did get it in the torture rapporteur's thematic reports. And every step, every time there was an obstacle, we found some way to address it. And I think we have found the ways to address it because there's an inherent logic of non-discrimination and what it means to actually understand that all people with disabilities have the same rights as everyone else, which is in Article 1 of the Convention, full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms, nobody left out. That was also a premise of what we were doing, of our advocacy from the World Network, you know, to not allow any restrictions or exclusions. And just one last point on legal capacity, one thing I recall in the struggle to get rid of the footnote was a representative from Finland. Finland at that time had the presidency of the European Union. So they played an important role. And this was not an ambassador, it was probably the third committee representative, the person representing them in New York on a regular basis, who said, it's very simple. People with disabilities have to have the same legal capacity as everybody else has. If other adults in a country have the capacity to act, people with disabilities have the same capacity, end of story. So when you get states adopting the logic, and this is just, the whole thing just keeps snowballing and keeps snowballing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tina. I had one kind of, I think it just ties up with this discussion we are having on legal capacity. And before, I mean, I wanted to have this discussion on cross-disability advocacy with Stefan, also because I very, remember the statement that you made at the closure of the fourth ad hoc committee's deliberations, wherein you had said, we'll celebrate later, this is not the celebration statement. And the fact also that Lex Grandia had made one of the most powerful statements for legal capacity, and it was at that point that World Network decided it will not speak. And the first speech when civil society makes interventions will come from an organization other than World Network. But if you all remember, we did not have too much psychiatric presence in the ad hoc committee. And yet, after the convention has got adopted, and when we are coming into implementation, and especially after the general comment, there has been a very major psychiatric surge on what all is wrong with Article 12 and why, you need legislations which would in some manner ensure mental health. So mental health legislations burgeoning in different parts of the world which didn't even have them before. And they're talking about things like advanced directives and nominated representatives, but you don't talk about open dialogue or peer support. None of those really find a mention. So I was just wanting to speak with you, Chris, on this, as to what is your view on this reversal, and how do we interpret this absence from the ad hoc committee and now this sudden presence everywhere, where it's like to say that, oh, if you guys are going to go ahead and implement that general comment, things are not going to be good for people with psychosocial disabilities.
Yeah, thanks for asking. And I have to say, I vacillate on this. I feel very ambivalent. There are moments when I despair, and then there are moments when I see it as a part of the progression of social change. I guess when I was doing the work at the UN, somebody said to me, nobody ever woke up one morning and said, today I'm going to give up some power. And I think that in many respects encapsulates some of what we're working with. There are a lot of organizations, people, and mega industries that have a lot of power and a lot of control in psychiatric services and treatment, and they're not going to give that up easily. So I look to the women's movement as both an inspiration and a warning, that it's taken decades, hundreds of years and decades for us to make any progress at all, and it's been sporadic and spotty, and we've certainly made progress, and we've certainly got a hell of a long way to go. And that's how I feel about things like peer support and open dialogue. I think we come from, particularly in peer support, we come from a much more grassroots place. And so it's really hard for us to have a lot of political clout, and we do the best we can, and often we slap back. Setbacks happen, and funding is pulled, and peer support is the first thing to go. And so I think we need to I think we need to work to find allies to push to support what we're doing. I think we need to find really creative researchers who are committed to dialogic practices and to doing research in this realm in ways that actually measure the kind of changes that we're looking for. So we mostly don't talk about recovery, although we acknowledge that it's sort of like a brand name for what we, for the kind of inclusion that we're trying to create in the realms of the CRPD. But that's the paradigm through which most academics and researchers are looking, and we're looking for something that doesn't even include the notion that there's something to recover from. And so that requires a lot of creativity, a lot of ability to be able to think outside the box, and frequently the sort of lived experience that we so value in the work that we do. I think we need to keep challenging the power and authority that's given to psychiatry, to the pharmaceutical industry, and those challenges need to happen at a legislative legal basis, and we need journalistic challenges, we need research challenges, and we need funding sources for that. And in terms of promoting, my realm is peer support, but open dialogue is another mode of bringing in all of the networks that a person is involved in to begin to recreate and tell the story in a different way, and to build relationships in different ways. And I think we need to find creative ways of telling stories of what is working. And within that, I think there's two sides to that. One is there's what is working and what is not working. The damage and the harm that coercion and force and marginalization and oppression causes needs to keep being put out there and told. Those stories need to be told, and we're doing it already, but we need to keep on doing it and making it very public, because it's only in understanding that what people are doing is harmful that we can actually move towards change and abolition. And then I think we also need to find creative and innovative ways to tell stories of what has happened that has worked, and how that's working. And as I say, I think we need to, doing it ourselves, but also finding allies, and just continuing to promote the view that biomedical, it's like there's a huge mansion that we're living in, and biomedical psychiatry worldview is a tiny room in that mansion, about the size of a toilet. And we want to take the walls off that little room and say, look, there are so many other ways of making meaning of our experiences, of seeing ourselves, of supporting one another, of navigating pathways through. And in the greater scheme of things, that's a very small part of it. And for some people that's important, and they can return to that room, but there are so many other ways that we can live well. And there are such a wide range of reasons that people end up getting caught in the system. It's as much luck or chance as anything else. How do we support one another to live well, to create the kind of communities that support the kind of diversity and difference that we represent? Because that's, I think that's the sort of the edge that's going to create the kind of social change that we need. And finally, I'll say, if I look back at women getting the vote, the abolition of slavery, there was a general, there was an understanding that not having the vote and slavery was wrong. It's taking us generations to work out how to actually put this into, how to change the generations, the intergenerational trauma and attitude that that was sort of endemic. So it's a work in progress, and we're small cogs in a bigger process.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think, when Tina spoke, she spoke about the whole importance of solidarity. She also spoke in terms of that you can't really look at Article 12 on legal capacity separately from Article 14, which is talking in terms of the right to liberty, and 15, which is saying that you can't be subjected to torture. And yet we all know that, like when we battled for these articles at different points of time, it wasn't like, like this is the designated group or individual which has to fight for it. Cross disability advocacy, alliance building was a major learner for all of us in the deliberations of the ad hoc committee. You learn to speak for each other, you learn to speak. So I thought I will turn to Stefan at this point, and like, because you, I would say, would yourself acknowledge, that how we started out in the ad hoc committee deliberations with literally speaking, every single organization wanting to make its intervention, to the point where it became like that, okay, you form a kind of an, the IDC came, and then the allocation of time theme came. And yet when the footnote came at the end, it was like we were all so shell-shocked that none of us felt we could really go and make that statement. And you made a very powerful one for us at that point. So I would say for all of us, not just for us, for everyone. So I would somewhere feel that from your experience in the ad hoc committee to the work that you've been doing with cross-disability work, if you could sort of provide some insights on the way forward, the point that Chris is making is valid, that, okay, maybe it's a long battle, but Chris, people are starting to lose patience, so you need to keep having hope. And I do think that solidarity brings hope. Yeah, Stefan, if we could hear you on this.
Well, I think it's easier for me to look back than to look
look forward.
But I think there's some lessons learned. No? As you said, at the beginning of the process, a lot of disability organizations came, not so many from the South. They came a bit later because there was a resource issue there. It was a challenge. But I think even there, I think it was good to see how organizations from the South gradually took part of it. And even when there was a stronger presence of organizations from the South, we were extremely strategic in saying, okay, look, whatever discussions we have, we will have them within our closed doors. When we go out there, to show that we have a clear position and it's a unified position. No? And because in a process which is, as Chris described, it's mostly a process between governments, between foreign affairs ministries of governments who know about disability. If we would not have been able to go out there with a unified voice, why would they have listened to us? No? And I remember from the first meetings, each discussion, it's first the states that speak, I don't know whether somebody else before, and then at the end, the NGOs, the civil society was allowed to speak. No? And that was, of course, the moment when the government delegates were going out to the room, having a coffee, because who gave a damn about what the disability organization were saying? From that situation, which was there the first and second meeting, to the last session, when government delegations were quoting the IDC saying, this proposal we are making here is in line with what the IDC is saying, I mean, they were using us to make their points. No? So in this record time, we had moved from a situation where we were there as a sort of guests, kindly invited to the room, but please don't make too much noise, to really become a central player. No? And with Ambassador McKay saying at the end, you remember that 70% of the text was coming from disability organizations. No? And I think it's a fair point, right? Especially the most complicated parts, they came from the disability movement. No? And I think we need to remember those lessons. I mean, and I think you've seen also the growth of the International Disability Alliance, which was a very loose coming together. I mean, Tina was sitting on the board, but it was a rather weak structure, basically coming together around the negotiation versus an organization like now, which has played a major role in influencing the sustainable development goals and all that. No? I think where we still have the challenge, of course, is for cross-disability organizations to be embracing the more complex issues, especially also sometimes in a context where especially organizations representing persons with psychosocial disabilities are usually the ones that have less resources, are not always, I mean, I think TCI is a good example of that's happening well, no? But you don't have good organizations everywhere, no? And that sometimes has an impact, and then, well, these issues tend to be forgotten. At the same time, I'm very positive. I mean, asked a bit in the questions to the run-up saying, what is the gain of Article 12? I mean, imagine our work without the CRPD and without Article 12. I mean, no, we would be nowhere. Now, situation where I come from Spain. When the Spanish government came to the first time to the CRPD committee, they were saying, well, we are now, and Spain is very good in telling the Latin American in particular how good we are in Spain. And they went there basically saying, we have everything perfect in Spain. And the CRPD committee, I mean, the right back and front. I mean, because especially on the complicated issues, that was absolutely wrong what we had in Spain. And now you have countries like Peru, like Tina, you mentioned. Peru is setting the example in the world of how to deal with legal capacity. And that would, of course, not have happened without the CRPD and with Article 12. No? But of course, we have a challenge. It is a complex issue. It's not something you can just sit back and relax and hope that people will seize their power to others. Like. But I think we have a tool at our hand which we didn't have before.
Wonderful.
We need to use it, and we need the solidarity within the disability movement. But I think also the solidarity outside. I mean, there are also other organizations out there, human rights commissions, the National Human Rights Institute, etc., who in many cases have played quite an interesting role in support also of the more advanced challenges that the CRPD is, and opportunities that the CRPD is bringing to us. Back to you, Amit.
I think Chris made that point pretty strongly too, Stefan, when she said that, we need to be looking at a range of other alliances. We don't have to, alliances that which were possibly appropriate when the drafting of the convention was happening. Now that you want to implement the convention, now you want to catch imagination of people much larger than just the directly involved community which was there at the ad hoc committee. And I think whether it's journalists or researchers or it's to speak or administrators to speak in terms of who are the various people you need to get on board. Tina, there's a question for you there in relation in the box, which the people want to know that exactly what it was like to be representing the WNSP and presenting its views, especially from different contexts and regions, on an issue which was like so contentious. Would you want to come in now and answer to it, or want to come to it later?
I mean, I can try to say it briefly. I was typing in the question and answers. I'd say it was really a process of awareness raising internally. I think the notion that we could actually do anything at the United Nations that would be meaningful, that was not something that everyone in the World Network or the user survivor community generally would automatically get on board with. So I felt like a lot of my work was generating interest and, to continually bring back, not only for consultation, but just to let people know that this is going on. It was actually on Article 12, it was consulting in our networks that was what first led me to say, there's no possibility that we can accept any limitations of legal capacity for anybody. Because when I started out, not for myself, but I had some of the same prejudices that everybody tends to bring to legal capacity in relation to somebody else. Surely there's somebody somewhere where some situation where legal capacity could be restricted, but it was our networks that that pretty much said, no, there's no place for that. And then we had to theorize, we had to construct the logic of what that meant, that it was okay to support somebody, but not to take decision-making away from them. We did not have extensive networks in other regions at the time of the ad hoc committee. As Amita said, I did make the effort through the World Network to bring people from other regions, and there was funding for that purpose in a voluntary fund at the UN. So we brought people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America to the ad hoc committee. And of course, they contributed significantly, including people on this panel. So I think there was always that as part of what we were doing. And subsequent to the ad hoc committee, there came to be the regional organizations and, you know, just taking the issues in their own directions. I wanted to mention for Africa, the African Protocol on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It hasn't yet entered into force, but it's a beautiful, beautiful instrument that had significant input from people from the Pan-African Network of People with Psychosocial Disabilities. It really takes the CRPD, enshrines things even more explicitly, like legal capacity and the prohibition of detention and involuntary treatment. It puts that in the torture article, and really develops certain things from it that are important in an African context. I think things. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank right now, but it's a very beautiful instrument, and I think it's another example that shows how regional development is important, and the normative development keeps continuing even after the convention has entered into force.
I suppose one of the things which I would do as a takeaway from this intervention, which came from Tina, was about the whole factor of that to make for representative negotiations or to make for a team, you have to kind of very often proactively do it. Sometimes, of course, it would be that, you know, there are developed organizations and they come on board. At other points of time, you may have to really look for people and say, but no, people around the table must be like, you know, must be representing every part of the world. And I thought in that connection, Daniel, when you sort of spoke first, you talked about the fact of like, you know, what is it that you learned at the ad hoc committee deliberations, which then you took back to your country. Of course, my favorite story of the entire ad hoc committee deliberations is from the person from Uganda, who the person with disability, James, who was a member of the Uganda delegation and who virtually ensured that we have the right to integrity in the convention. Because if it hadn't been for him saying that, all right, fine, if you're not going to have this article, then I'm going to ask for a vote. And everybody was taken aback that, oh my God, you know, this person from Uganda wants a vote, and consequently Article 17 got passed. But I thought, you know, like your cross-disability experience, Daniel, because you are talking in terms of some of the things that you've been doing in your country, I think we could have that as one quick intervention. And then I want to move on to Gerard Quinn and to the, you know, what is it that he has as his agenda as the rapporteur, as the disability rapporteurs with the Human Rights Council, as well as what is the agenda we want to give to Gerard Quinn. Gerard, I'm giving you a little time. As Daniel is speaking, you can put your speech together.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much, Amita. So the question about cross disability, of course, it's not an easy thing in Uganda because psychosocial disability is new, and there's nothing visible which shows that you are actually disabled as people with hearing impairment or visual impairment or those with physical disability. So it has been a progressive realization for them to accept us, because in the national umbrella disability movement, first of all, they used to call us associate members. Of course, we had no right to vote, no right to speak in the General Assembly, and until we had to use the CRPD and sensitize them about psychosocial disability, and also they move together. As you can well be aware that when we are in the UN, also it was not easy to come up with a language which is all inclusive because it was very difficult. We would come up with a language and then it would be excluding some other person. It was not an easy process. Also, the domestication is not very easy, especially in the context of Uganda. I don't know what it is elsewhere, but with time, progressively, they are beginning to realize that what we are fighting for is exclusion and discrimination and labeling, which is within the disability agenda, the inclusion. So if we are doing that, then we should not marginalize again others, saying this and that and that. It takes a lot, especially on the grassroots, because in the grassroots, you remember the grassroots, people are not all that educated to read or do this and read other things internationally. So it takes a lot of time really to explain and tell them that we are part and parcel of the disability fraternity and all that. So it has not been an easy process, but it is progressively coming up, and I believe the unified voice will come up, but there are still challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I mean, I take your point, especially about the fact of needing to do a lot of things, a lot of explanation, especially when you are kind of doing, text-related work. So I kind of, amongst my last major question in this panel is, to the Special Rapporteur on Disability with the Human Rights Council. I thought, considering like the first time you came in, you told us of like how you came into the entire disability work. I thought it would be interesting for us to hear what is it that you are envisioning for the future? How do you see your earlier experiences like kind of converging with what you're doing now? What kind of support, solidarity you're expecting from people around here, and what are they expecting from you? I mean, I feel that the last 20 odd minutes, if we could spend on that. I mean, it's not only Gerard speaking, though I would want him to make the first intervention.
Okay. Thanks, Amita. I'll be brief. One or two preliminary comments. I mean, one of the first things I ever read my first year in college was Max Weber, if you remember all the way back, and how beautiful ideas, no matter how beautiful, tend to become bureaucratized and lack any life. And I'm very struck by how COVID has reminded us that the old paradigm is still alive and well. It's out there, and the truth comes to the surface during a period of crisis. And it certainly has with a bang and a wallop. So I think one of my subliminal tasks, so to speak, is to continuously articulate the culture that lies beneath the text of the CRPD, because it's easy to connect with text, but it's much, much harder to connect by articulating what that vision is. The other preliminary point I'd make is that even if the culture matches the law and the policy, even if the right kind of paradigm animates changed legislation and so forth, systems tend to take a lot longer to die, and they carry within them the DNA of old ways of thinking. And unless we're attentive to systems change, it can undercut or undermine some of the other nominal changes we've already made. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in the chemistry between the CRPD and the UN SDGs, because they're much more intentionally focused on that systemic change. So that's just a few preliminaries. In terms of the thematic work, and by the way, the SR is not confined to the thematic work, it's just work that must be done each year. But in terms of the thematic work, I'm dividing it into three tranches in my own mind. the first shouts out loud, hey, we're here. Okay, there's some big challenges facing humanity, and thus far, the responses to these challenges have not really included a disability voice or perspective. And I'm talking partly about COVID, obviously, but also climate change and adaptation and the lack of voices of people with disabilities in the adaptation planning. I'm talking about the whole scourge of armed conflicts around the world. There's 16 armed conflicts taking place, which is atrocious when you think about it. And I'm not just interested in, how we displace the medicalized view of people with disabilities in armed conflict that's deeply ingrained in the Geneva Conventions, Invalides, and so forth, but also the more positive side of the story, the contribution of people with disabilities to peace processes, constitution drafting around the world, especially in transitional justice periods in different countries, and maybe extreme poverty and disability, because we need a lot of fresh thinking on that. And I should have said, as a matter of preliminaries, that there's a bunch of other SRs out there who are interested in disability, and I'd love to get them involved in some of the work that I would be doing. Particularly the new SR on extreme poverty is very interested in doing work on that. Then I have a middle layer of potential thematic projects. I'm calling it loosely for the moment, don't hold me to this, hidden intersectionalities. And I'm interested in intersectionality, not just because of the family resemblances of the groups, but also because it allows you to dig deeper into some of the common challenges and maybe to begin reframing solutions that cut across the life course and the different boundaries. And Tina and Stefan will remember there were kind of murmurings during the drafting of the convention that we might get something in there on Indigenous people and disabilities. Okay, we didn't really, but that doesn't stop us doing something focused on the issue. I'm very interested in older people with disabilities. Let's cut to the chase here. I'm very interested in the future, question mark, of long-term care for older people, but also the issue of human agency and legal capacity for older people. And I'm toying around with the idea of doing something on the rights of prisoners with disabilities, but not just in the static sense of, hey, many prisoners have a disability, therefore, but also using it as an occasion to look at much deeper systemic issues. And Tina and I have a bilateral discussion on that, which is extremely fruitful. Lastly, then I want to shine a light on some rights or some issues or some groups or some systems concerns that don't generally see the light of day. I'm particularly drawn to the right to culture and access to culture, not just because it's important for the individual, but also because there's a link there with the democratization process in society and the whole process of imagining and reimagining realities. Article 12 is an attempt at reimagining reality, but I think there's a lot more contributions besides that. I'm particularly interested in the service paradigm and how it draws us back right across the life course, not just for people with disabilities, but also for older people. And I keep getting reminded of Weber that if your service system harbors within it the DNA of an old model, that old model is not going to disappear. The only way you're actually going to strike a nail in that coffin is to actually reimagine service paradigm completely into the future. I'm especially interested in, somebody mentioned this, I think it was Tina, regional arrangements. we've not brought together the regions of the world to compare notes, to contrast experiences, to encourage each other, to become multipliers for the cultural shift of the convention. And I think a lot is happening that's very positive. And you below the regional organizations, you have informal regional groupings of states, for example, the British Commonwealth, the Group Francophonie, the Ibero-American network of states. So there's a lot of opportunities there and a lot of cross-learning and a lot of comfort they can give each other that, hey, you know, to innovate is a good thing. By the way, one thing I would hope that would come from that is everybody says to the Council of Europe, stop the protocol to the Oviedo Convention. Bad idea. So that in a nutshell is my thematic work.
All right. So I thought it was appropriate that if, like the other panelists, could also sort of outline maybe 2 minutes or whatever each to say, or exactly what would you want to put on the agenda of both the rapporteur as well as such on our own agendas. We would sort of encourage people to put into the chat box, and I think one or the other of us will read out, and definitely we'll read it ourselves, right? I'm not calling out anybody. Anybody could start this as to what you think should get added on there.
I'd like to address something. I mean, this is not so much for Gerard, as he said, we've started a discussion that I hope will be really fruitful about the justice issues that start out being linked to prisoners with disabilities. I want to actually talk about what should be on our agenda collectively, where I see the next level of development. And this also goes back to the question about pushing forward things like peer support in contrast to psychiatry. So we actually have had the World Health Organization coming on board supporting the CRPD abolition of forced and coerced interventions. That has been a huge thing. And they are they're trying to promote their vision of mental health policy, and then they're going to try to do something with legislation that should comply with the CRPD. But it's still, you have the health sector putting themselves in charge of the human rights and the practical day-to-day implementation of human rights of people with psychosocial disabilities, including the supports that people may need related to their disability or to experiences of distress or crisis that we may not want to call psychosocial disability. Similarly, in Peru, also there are initiatives in Spain and Mexico where mental health legislation or regulations not only can potentially abolish coercion, but also are including measures like peer support, community kinds of support. And I think those are advances, but they are also still a problem because uniquely people with psychosocial disabilities, unlike other disability groups, are being put under the mental health sector. Nobody wants to be under the health sector. So what I have been working out, which I see as the next step in the logic of the CRPD, is to formulate a conceptualization of crisis support as support for decision-making in crisis situations and support for the practical tasks of daily life in crisis situations, which is Articles 12 and Article 19 of the Convention. So I think this is an important piece of the logic that can bring us fully within the social model. I think it's it's a huge uphill battle because it's the mental health sector that still puts itself in charge, and that is still looked to even by DPOs themselves as being something that's the way, that's where the opportunity lies to influence institutions of power. But I think that we need to continue challenging that. So that's my piece in this. And thanks to everyone for a great discussion.
Thank you so much. Bhargavi, would you want to come in? Oh, she's not there.
No,
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah.
It's just been so fascinating to listen to everyone. I'm feeling so grateful here for having this conversation. Are you ready to close already? Or
no, we have about 10 minutes. So I was just asking you to come in as such, if you wanted to like join, add on to what Tina was saying, because some of the concerns are your concerns also. It was that reason that I asked you.
Yeah, well, I was just noting down what thoughts came to me, and I want to say that there's a big need for voices from around the world of user survivor movements, mad people, people with neurodiverse identities, all of us to come together to really look at psychiatric oppression, which has taken newer and newer forms in recent times, particularly for us in the global south. If earlier the professionals were denying the CRPD, now the call for nothing about us without us is being appropriated. And we're having so many groups coming up, Global Alliance of this and the Global Alliance of that. It's really worrying. So we're not very sure whether it was better for them to deny the CRPD or now make it their own and give it their own interpretation. And despite many years of amazing work by the CRPD committee and by all of us in the movement worldwide, and also people who have supported the movement, particularly I want to remember the cross disability movements which have fought hard to include us in many ways. So there is that. But we are still, legal capacity, we are very, very far from achieving much, particularly in the Commonwealth nations, which have a very peculiar legal structure compared to the other countries which are not Commonwealth. So there is that. In the movement in Asia Pacific, we all feel that something is changing and something is getting better. However, we also feel that it's not up to speed. And at the national level, even for us to be recognized as political subjects who have the right to representation, to form associations, these are so difficult. Good practices. Tina mentioned the WHO efforts, but unfortunately, peer-led efforts, like for example, Chris Hansen's intentional peer support, some of the really strong peer-led Mary O'Hagan, some of these efforts are not mentioned, and some of them, and whatever I have seen of the WHO efforts to compile those good practices together, I don't know how many of them commit to a prohibition on coercion. So what I feel is that even from the WHO, the efforts which are coming out are much more ameliorative or mitigating harm rather than being transformative and inclusive. So this is something that's been really, and that's also the motivation for this session. And thank you all for indulging a wish from TCI Asia Pacific that we need to hear about this all over again, and thanks to Dr. Quinn, we really request that you take our issues into your mandate and be really attentive to some of the things which are going on in the world. If after 10, 12 years of the CRPD, we are still like, okay, who are we and where are we? It's not very nice. So that's what I want to say. In the Global South, we won't work. There are people here, Yeni is here, Vakar is here from TCI Asia Pacific, people from the Bapu Trust. So we know that, if mental health is caused by the social barriers, then the task ahead of us is to implement the SDGs in our context. But there are huge gates which we cannot enter. And those gates must just drop for us. This is what we really expect. And I would love for us in TCI to, to recall all of you and all the other names which are posted in the chat box. Thanks to all of you. It's a wonderful vision and wonderful guidance, and really grateful to each and all of you for, bringing this very big gift to us. And also working hard to ensure that we don't forget, the key message of that gift. But to make it practical, I think there's a lot of work ahead of us. Chris mentioned the women's movement. Well, our movement has been around ever since the war. Post-war, we've been like in the struggle. It's been a long movement for us. It's about time we saw some really solid gains. So thank you so much.
Well, I would sort of, I think, as closing remarks, would want to sort of say two kinds of things. One is, it's important to get impatient, because impatience and a certain level of almost irritation is important for other things to happen. At the same time, it's also to keep remembering that, yes, these kind of frustrations were felt before. When we actually got the convention at the end of the day, when we got in Article 12, or the fact that we got the right to integrity the way we got it, that there was every effort made to try to bring in, civil commitment into the CRPD with one or the other way. Every time you got a new kind of formulation coming and you caught it out and you said, no, this is not acceptable, this is not. And it was done primarily with a lot of people believing that it can be done. I think part of why we wanted to get together here was to say there's a lot that belief can do, and there's a lot a common belief can do. And it's important for us, if we remember the failures, we also remember the successes, because if you remember the successes, you can replicate them. If you remember the fact that, yes, people did resist, people did say this is not possible, and you had, votes happening and turnarounds happening, because you suddenly had an entire world community having to sit with people with disabilities and say, no, this we cannot give you. And they found it difficult to do. So the fact of the human and humane, how much it was able to do to kind of go forward, is not to be forgotten. At the same time, the prejudice, which somehow the other keeps resurfacing at every point of time, cannot also be ignored. We just have to do, I think what Chris was saying is that we have to enhance our networking or our affiliations and our advocacy to not just like designated disability organizations or people who are kind of working only with people with disabilities or on disability issues, because disability issues as such arise in every human rights issue that we do. And it's important that we don't let that be forgotten. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank all the attendees, the TCI Asia team, people at BAPU who have done all this amazing work for, I think, a very, very rewarding evening, which was as much nostalgia as it was like, looking forward and getting ourselves all primed up for continuing to struggle, because struggle is about life. And if you're alive, one never is going to hesitate to struggle for the kind of world we want. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Bhargavi. I'm handing it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Amita, and thanks to Tina, Chris, Daniel, Dr. Quinn, Stefan, for this amazing evening, and also thanks to the interpreters. It's for us been a very heart-fulfilling 2 hours. I don't know, about remembering the CRPD and how much this remembrance can bring back good sentiments, but what it does for us in TCI Asia Pacific and in the movement of people with psychosocial disabilities at the national level in Asia Pacific region is to give us energy and to hold on to that impatience, to hold on to that irritation, but to keep going. And I think this is an important threshold for us to be able to relive this and to say that, hey, people have struggled. I know how difficult it was, we kept hearing from you, Amita, about what was going on in the ad hoc committee meetings, and all the struggles, and how I mean, it was amazing the kind of effort that went into the making of the CRPD. And so we love it. We cherish what we got. We cherish what we got, and we cherish the effort that each of you put in, and then so many others. It's lovely to see in the chat box, how many people contributed to this. Shows the strength of the movement, shows strength of the resilience of people who keep going, despite so many odds. So thank you all for this. Really, really grateful. We hope so in TCI that we will cherish the CRPD and be grateful, continue to be grateful to the efforts that went in, remember it again and again, and to keep writing, keep advocating, and all of that. So, and thanks to Ida for being a partner. Thanks to Nalsar, and thanks to Amita for for taking this idea up as something worthwhile to do. Thanks to all the attendees, to the participants, and to the sign language interpreters, Preeti and Pinky. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, and yeah.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
The recording. The recording. Okay.